someone is going to bleed.
Stand up and shout!
Okay, if you don't know what this is about, then I suggest you read the articles here. Brain Man makes waves with claims of recent human evolution. And also you can look at scientists' study of brain genes sparks a backlash. This is going off somewhat of what I said in my video, The Zeitgeist, regarding race and gender studies. And in particular in regards to Bruce Lahn, Sofia's thoughts on the matter. She says here that I'm demonstrating her point that people who do crappy work try to evade criticism by crying persecution. That's a real quick two-liner sum up of her position. We'll get into that a bit more here. But I can't address, of course, everything in this video. It would be impossible. But what I will do is talk more on about Lahn. I will leave you a link to this comment section here and to her video where she first brought up Lahn himself. So, but even if you don't do all that, you can still pretty much gather from what I'm saying here what's going on. So let's read, shall we? There are two theories as to the actions of Lahn. SofiaRune believes that Lahn used the claim of political correctness as a shield against his detractors that were criticizing his work. To use her own words, people who do crappy work try to evade criticism by crying persecution. Then there is my belief. The actions of Lahn are reflective and consistent with the current zeitgeist in regards to gender and race studies. Simply put, and keep in mind one could write a book on this, the zeitgeist concerning these areas are chock full of folks that would fall into the nurture side of the nature versus nurture debate. And anything that stinks of the nature side is highly scrutinized, if it's ever considered at all. Whereas the nurture side requires little scrutiny. Such things as stereotype threat are easily accepted, but anything inherent to the individual that could possibly have results similar to stereotype threat, well, why bother looking? We have the answer we're looking for. Another way to look at this is by looking at the hypocrisy apparent in these folks regarding homosexuality. The very same folks who will go wild at any thought of inherent behavior in humans won't bat a lash at the inherent nature of homosexuality, and as a matter of fact will argue for it being a result of nature as opposed to nurture. Why is it with this particular human behavior that they are willing to violate their standards, but with every other behavior they hold fast? Regardless of the answer, and I don't believe there is a single or simple answer, the point here is what I'm describing, at least partially, is the current zeitgeist. Now, in effect, Sofia is positing that this position does not apply to Lahn, that for him, he merely had his ego hurt by doing, in her words, crappy work, and getting called out on it, and because of that, and only that, he decided that pursuing that type of work was not for him anymore. I posit that he got the picture that that type of work was not easily swallowed, that he knew what he was doing could have the result it did, but not to the extent he thought. He got more than he could handle, and says as much when asked about the controversy. Quote, "On the one hand, I don't regret the things we wrote in the papers because they were scientifically justified, and the speculative nature of some of our statements was clearly indicated as such. On the other hand, I can appreciate why some people might be concerned over the possibility that our results could be overinterpreted or even misinterpreted to advance certain ideas about race and ethnicity, especially by people with certain political agenda. Our society, given its sordid history on race-related issues, is very confused about how to deal with racially and ethnically sensitive topics. As a result, science and politics gets mixed up when they relate to these topics. I personally feel, like many other scientists, that science should be separate from politics. In particular, science should meet the same burden of proof regardless of what political implications it might have. But this, too, may be too idealistic, if not naive. I feel I am still learning how to handle such issues in a way that is honest to the science, while at the same time sensitive and respectful to political and cultural needs. So does that sound, end quote. So does that sound like someone who is butthurt and screaming political correctness at his detractors? Or does it sound like someone who is a bit naive, though not completely, about the current zeitgeist? When asked about his failure to correlate the variations of microcephaly and ASPM with differences in intelligence, Lahn replied, quote, "On the scientific level, I am a little disappointed, but in the context of the social and political controversy, I am a little bit relieved." Does that sound like someone who is butthurt and screaming political correctness at his detractors? Or does it sound like someone who was a bit naive, though not completely, about the current zeitgeist? Does that sound like someone who thinks his work is correct and using the shield of political correctness to justify his work? No. It sounds like he accepts the criticism of his work and is willing to argue on that front, not using political correctness as a shield, which is also reflected in this quote. Quote, "A team led by geneticist David Reich on the Broad Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts, reported at the meeting of the American Society of Human Genetics that it found no evidence for recent selection on ASPM when it used a method of analysis it considered superior to Lahn's. But Lahn, who is familiar with Reich's results, stands by his conclusions. Their method has lower resolution and is less reliable, he says. No mention of political correctness there. Quite the opposite, really. We could ask what some of his detractors were saying. Harvard geneticist Richard Lewitton goes on further, criticizing both Lahn and science for publishing such speculative links to cultural advances. Quote, "These two papers are particularly egregious examples of going well beyond the data and try to make a splash." End quote. Is that addressing the science? Or is it claiming a nefarious motive on the part of Lahn? If the standard is that one can be criticized in regards to personal motives or beliefs, then the standard ought to be applied to both parties. And as such, Lahn would be justified in saying some scientists, quote, "start with a political agenda and fit the evidence to that," end quote. This political bias, he argues, quote, "takes credibility away from the anti-racist program that I agree with. If someday we discover that there are genetic differences in cognitive abilities, would that mean that racism is now justified?" End quote. SofiaRune would have us believe that such criticism such as Lewitton's is fair. I would say that if that is so, then so ought be Lahn's. As far as speculation is concerned, I doubt Lewitton would be so anxious to spout off about it in regards to behavior he believes to be inherent to the human, if he does at all. What's his take on homosexuality? Has he gone after other scientists with such disdain who have speculated on that? Also, Lahn speaks about the speculation. Quote, "The speculative nature of some of our statements was clearly indicated as such," end quote. Perhaps Lewitton missed that part of the paper, or perhaps he didn't even look or care. No, Lewitton was the one that was butthurt, and instead of addressing the science, chose to ad hom Lahn instead. Sound fair? It's at this point of making a video where I usually ask myself, is this enough? Do I have to go on? Then I remember I'm not trying to convince the person I'm responding to of anything, and more than likely never would be able to, no matter how much is presented. What matters is that I put out there what I believe, and anyone who's interested in such things can draw their own conclusions. In the end, the case of Bruce Lahn is just one sample, but reflects a portion of the zeitgeist. Sofia may be right that folks have described this zeitgeist as political correctness in order to deflect criticism, but I don't believe that applies to Lahn. I believe Lahn realizes it for what it is, to a greater degree than he did before this controversy. And though not a complete picture, he writes clearly about it years after the controversy in Let's Celebrate Human Genetic Diversity. Reading from that paper, the current moral position is a sort of biological egalitarianism. This dominant position emerged in recent decades largely to correct grave historical injustices, including genocide, that were committed with the support of pseudoscientific understandings of group diversity. The racial hygienic theory promoted by German geneticist Fritz Lenz, Eugene Fischer, and others during the Nazi era is one notorious example of such pseudoscience. Biological egalitarianism is the view that no or almost no meaningful genetically based biological differences exist among human groups, with the exception of a few superficial traits such as skin color. Proponents of this view seem to hope that by promoting biological sameness, discrimination against groups or individuals will become groundless. We believe that this position, although well-intentioned, is illogical and even dangerous, as it implies that if significant group diversity were established, discrimination might thereby be justified. We reject this position. Equality of opportunity and respect for human dignity should be humankind's common aspirations, notwithstanding human differences, no matter how big or small. We also think that biological egalitarianism may not remain viable in the light of the growing body of empirical data. Many people acknowledge the possibility of genetic diversity at the group level, but see it as a threat to social cohesion. Some scholars have even called for a halt to research into the topic or sensitive aspects of it because of political misuse of the information. Others will ask, if information on group diversity can be misused, why not just focus on individual differences and ignore any group variation? We strongly affirm that the society must guard vigilantly against any misuse of genetic information, but we also believe that the best defense is to take a positive attitude towards diversity, including that at the group level. We argue for our position from two perspectives. First, that the understanding of group diversity can benefit research in medicine, and second, that human genetic diversity as a whole, including group diversity, greatly enriches our species. So that is it, folks. I'll have more links than just these two, of course, for you to look at. And the other video covers some of this, and then, of course, there's a lot expressed in the comment sections. And again, this is still not even right. Like I said, someone can write a book, and I'm sure there's been books written to this, something regarding all this sort of thing. But this is YouTube. This is what you get. It's more than what most people will give you, so take it or leave it. Peace out, my brothers, sisters, and everyone in between.